and get into this video. We're going to be doing a lesson on how to draw hands, and the first one here is going to be a hand that's taking hold of a pole or holding a sword or something like that. I kind of did a video like this years ago, but the resolution was particularly poor, and so I'm starting anew, and I think also the angle that I'm showing this hand at is slightly different from what I did last time. But let's go ahead and get into this. I'm making a shape here that's going to be the basic shape of the palm of this hand. And it begins by cutting across the pole. Now, I think the main thing you're trying to do is to get the fingers to appear like they're really gripped on that pole or sword handle or whatever it's going to be. And so that's what we're going to focus on to begin with. So I'm going to begin by drawing a sort of a boxy shape that for me symbolizes the fingers. And the main thing that you really need to focus on, if you're trying to draw the hand as I'm drawing it here, is that the bottom part of the fingers is pretty close to this bottom part line of the pole, right? So you have a top line, a bottom line, and you can see there's just a little bit of a gap there below it. But above it, there's quite a large gap, and that is where the knuckles are going to go and so forth. It may be a little hard to see what I'm doing at this point. Unfortunately, there's no way of avoiding that until I get a little further along. But let's go ahead and draw the rest of the base of the palm here. And as you look at this, each one of these things is creating a certain shape, a certain boxy shape that's a little bit hard to describe. You know me, I'm very challenged when it comes to describing anything. But this is a shape that truly is. It's not an easy shape to describe. The base of the palm is coming across like this, and then maybe just to help you see the relationship between these lines, I'm going to lightly put in a line that's really just a guideline. It's just mainly going to vanish later on. But maybe if you look at this, the way this line relates back to that one, this whole thing creates the sort of the basic shape of the fist. And what I'm going to do now, this is maybe the easier thing that will help you to see what we're drawing here, is I'm going to draw the wrist. And the wrist is pretty much coming straight off of this line, right, that we did here, goes straight down. And then this one, there's a little bit of a gap. See that gap, or not gap, but there's just it attaches in a way that allows the thumb to come out at a little bit of separation from that wrist line. Just something to focus on there. Let's go ahead and get into drawing the actual fingers, because it is a tricky thing. And what I want to do is begin by making a curved line here. And this curved line, conveniently, sort of lands right on that second line, the top line of the pole. Of course, this is going to be erased, but it's nice to have it there to begin with to help you place this line. And then it is a matter of kind of dividing this into the actual finger, the fingers themselves. So what I want to do to begin with is come across here, and we're sort of carving off a little section that comes down around the bottom line there. Okay, now this is going to be the pinky. And that leaves basically the space between here and here as your area that needs to be divided into fours, right? So what I always do when I have something like this is to divide it in half first, because it's easier for me to see that. And then I can go ahead and divide the remaining spaces, right? And then you can maybe make little adjustments to get this as evenly spaced as possible. Now we're finally ready to start drawing the knuckles, the lines leading up to the knuckles. And one of the things that I've noticed is that these lines don't actually touch the knuckles. They kind of come back, and sometimes there's a little bit of a curve at the end of this line, these lines that delineate the separation of the fingers. And let's go ahead and start drawing some of these knuckles here. I'm going to go across, I'm going to make one line like so, and see this first initial guideline is helping me to place where each one of the knuckles is going to land. And put another one here, each one of them sort of resting upon that first guideline. and finally coming down here and reaching the edge of it. So we've got 3 of the knuckles, 3 of the fingers starting to take shape here, right? It's sort of coming down across. And I think what I need to do at this stage is step away from drawing the fingers and draw the thumb. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here. This is where the actual thumb is coming across, holding the fingers in place. And notice how far the this final... so they were explaining this to me because I was calling them digits. Is it phalange? The final phalange. I don't feel right saying that word, phalange. It sounds like something you'd order in a restaurant, right? I'll have the sautéed phalange, please. In any case, I'm coming across here with this last part. What I mean is this end part of the thumb. And what I want you to focus on is how far it goes. It kind of crosses right into this 3rd finger here. But not very far all the way across it. It just sort of comes on top, and then you can finish off that finger now that you've... well, hang on a second. I better erase here, because that's what this initial guideline was about. Mark, what are you doing? Let's go all the way down. This knuckle, or this one part of the... this one division of the finger comes all the way down to that initial guideline that we drew. Thank goodness I caught myself there. I would have... People would have been like, well, what is this line down here for, Crilly? What is with you today, man? Not enough caffeine. Or maybe too much caffeine. Anyway, this is getting these 3 fingers in place. And then finally, just to make it sort of interesting, this finger, the pointer finger, is coming up off of the pole just a little bit. It's sort of like holding it a little more loosely. I don't know if everyone's going to want to copy this part of it, but I saw a pose of a hand, you know, like a photograph, where the finger was separating just a little, and I thought it was interesting. It sort of made it more graceful somehow. That this pointer finger, that there was a little bit of a gap in there as it came across. But you can see how this initial line that we put here kind of becomes the knuckle line of, you know, all the way across those fingers. Each one of those becomes a knuckle. And then if you've placed all this properly, it should look like these fingers are wrapping around the pole quite tightly, holding it in place. That's always the challenge I find when drawing something like this, is that somehow that you can't make it look like the fingers are gripping that pole. And so that's why I've spent quite a lot of extra time trying to go over this aspect of it. There's a fold of flesh that comes in here, the base of the thumb, that you can put in there. And then we're almost done, really. One thing that I noticed, and this is sort of an extra detail that you might want to focus on, sort of like extra credit if you want to go for the advanced thing. You will sometimes see that there's an indication of the wrist, like a bone at the edge of the wrist that causes this line to sort of bulge out right around there. And yeah, that's something you can... And also flesh can sometimes bulge up around the pole, or the hand of the flesh is sort of in that causes an indentation right there. And then, you know, here's where we can begin to erase some of these initial guidelines so that this, you know, is more clearly visible what it is that I'm drawing. The last things I would want to do, this is, I imagine this is a man's hand. And I guess that doesn't really matter so much, but when I'm drawing a manly man's hand, so masculine, as he grips the sword to vanquish his foe. When I'm drawing a masculine hand, I don't feel like I have to make it super delicate looking. I'm going ahead and making it sort of boxy and putting angles in here and drawing a lot of, for example, I might draw the tendons bulging out here. I would never do that, I don't think, except for like a female warrior hand, you know, if that's part of what you're sort of trying to emphasize. I think generally when you're doing a female hand, you're putting fewer lines in, trying to make it look more elegant, generally speaking. Although I think I'm being incredibly sexist when I say something like that. I think it just depends more, maybe not so much on masculine or feminine or more, but is it like, is it more a action-adventure kind of thing, or is it more... yeah, an elegant story. Who knows? I better stop talking before I get myself into even more trouble. I'm going to drop in the thumbnail here. One thing I find that a lot of artists do, and I certainly try to do this myself, is to leave a little bit of the thumbnail up to the imagination. That is to say, not to make it too strongly outlined. I like to sort of put just a few little lines that indicate the thumbnail being there, but I don't want to get too carried away with delineating the entire edge of the thumbnail, or the fingernails for that matter. I think it just sort of makes it stand out a little too much. Well, we have spent already almost 11 minutes just on this one hand alone. I'm going to go ahead and kick it into time-lapse to finish off this drawing, then we'll move over to the second hand. All right, well, let's move on to the other hand here. This time we're going to do a female hand, speaking of feminine, and I'm going to start this time with the wrist, coming in here at an angle, and this hand is going to be sort of either picking up or placing down a penny or a small object. I want to show you how the fingers look when you have a hand that is, very precisely grasping some small object. Okay, so I'm starting with the lines of the wrist coming in here at an angle way over on the edge of the drawing space. And what I want to do now is focus on the actual palm, the base of the palm, coming across like this. Again, you end up with these unusual shapes, I find when you're drawing a hand shapes that are hard to describe simply. But see if you can sort of follow along with what I'm doing here. And part of the reason that I put this long rectangle in place was to maybe help you see the shapes, the sort of negative spaces around these shapes. Okay, so this is the palm here, ends up being this very unusual multi-sided shape. But as sort of a guideline, sometimes you can imagine a little bit of that space there. You can look at the distance between these lines and so forth. Just in terms of practice, of course, you won't always have that box there when you're trying to draw this hand later on. But for beginners, I find that it's helpful. Almost as a confidence-building measure, to have guidelines like these that you can see that help you reproduce these shapes. Anyway, this is the palm, as seen slightly from the side, the shape that it ends up making. And now what I want to do is move on to indicating where the fingers are going to go. Now, what happens when fingers are picking up a tiny little object is the pinky and some of the other fingers tend to sort of fan out because they are, unneeded. You don't really need those other fingers as you are picking up this tiny little object, whatever it is. I think the way my drawing, it'll end up looking like a dime, like it's picking up a dime or dropping a dime into a little, into a penny arcade or something like that. A penny arcade and a dime? That doesn't even make sense. It would be a dime arcade. Anyway, this is leading me nowhere. But what I've got here is I've created this shape that's telling me where the fingers are supposed to be. And I'm going to start by drawing the pinky. And like I said, the fingers that are not needed are kind of fanning up out of the way almost. And it creates this quite graceful look to the hand, which I enjoy seeing, and it's quite a challenge to draw, but if you're patient and try to go for it, you will be rewarded with a very graceful, elegant looking hand. So I'm drawing the pinky first, and the reason that I'm drawing the pinky first is this the one that's closest to us, and that's going to help with placing each finger behind the one that came before it. And so I'm going to move right along and draw the next largest finger, which is partially only the base of it is obscured a bit. But this time the finger is going to come all the way out here. One thing I've noticed as I study the hand, that the pinky is quite substantially shorter than all the other fingers. And that's the one thing that you need to focus on when you're drawing the fingers is the lengths of them. And I have another video that really but you see that this finger's the longest, these two come down, and then the pinky drops way down. So if you're just quickly drawing a hand and you want to make sure it looks convincing, one quick thing to focus on is to make sure that the pinky is indeed not just a little shorter, but quite substantially shorter than the other fingers. Now, I'm coming in to draw this. Each one of the fingers, of course, divides more or less evenly into 3 different parts, segments, phalanges, if I'm saying that correctly. I highly recommend the sautéed phalange, by the way, especially at Chez Creeley. They do it so well. In any case, I'm going on to draw the next finger. This one's coming down and pointing into the edge of that shape, you know, as the guideline that I initially put down there allows me to see. And just notice how each one of the fingers is at a very gradually different angle. I'm always using this word fanning out. I can't think of any better way to put it, that each one of the fingers is pointing in a slightly different direction. And there's something about that when you see it done that it creates this very graceful look. Now, I know what you're thinking. 3 fingers? Mark? You're forgetting something? Yes, indeed, we need a 4th finger here. Whew, stop the presses. Crilly is shocking his viewers, blowing their minds with this. Oh, there are 4 fingers. Wow, I didn't know that. Anyway, this is the one that's actually going to be holding this sort of dime or whatever tiny object that you want to hold and have the finger holding. And so this is really the only, the pointer finger is the only finger that's actually being used, and these other ones are kind of getting out of the way, politely getting out of the way, because we won't be needing you. And this is where we finish up with the fingers, and I can move on to drawing the thumb. And this line here at the base of the palm, in this case, is coming pretty straight down here. It doesn't really change too much as the thumb comes off. And then it may be helpful actually to actually draw. I'm going to draw like my little dime, my idea of the finger holding, pinching this little dime here. If I get that in place, then that's going to help me finish this off in terms of drawing the thumb. Now there is, I told you, this line comes off pretty straight. There's just a little bit of a bulge there as we reach this, the end of the thumb. And the thumb, of course, divides into only 2 parts rather than 3. I know, I'm just giving you all kinds of relevant information today. It's like, yeah, Mark, we knew that. We knew that about the thumb. In any case, one thing you can pay attention to is the shape of negative space that happens between the finger and the thumb. A lot of times, you know, artists are focusing on these negative space aspects. They're looking at the blank air between things as a guideline that helps them figure out where things are. Well, I can see that I have used like another 7 minutes on top of the previous ones, so I think I do need to move along with this. This line here is not going to be a real hard line. It's just really showing me the edge of the palm, and as I shade it in, this shows me where the shadow is going to fall in, all in here. You might want to add an extra line in here that delineates the way the palm sort of divides into 2 parts. I find that artists like to make a good, strong indication of that way that the palm divides into 2. And then there tends to be a little bit of something here to indicate like a padding almost along just below the fingers. I don't know if you even see it that much in real life, but I find that artists sometimes want to kind of firm things up in the illustration, give the eye more solid areas to sort of look at, to understand the structure of the hand rather than just leaving it blank. But as I said before, the more lines you add, the less graceful it tends to look. So watch as I come in here and start shading this, how these lines are going to be, you know, pretty lightly done. I'm not, my goal with this hand is indeed to create something quite elegant looking. Well, I feel like it is time to go ahead and finish this one up, so let's go ahead and kick it into time lapse, and I will be back with a few final words. Alright, well there you have it, another video on drawing hands. I've done like 3 or 4 of them now, and you know what, I will be doing more and more of them, because you really can't practice drawing hands too many times. But I do want to give the information to anyone who lives in the area of Manchester, England. I will be doing